So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and today we talk to Troy McLachlan, and our topic, of course, will be the Trump tariffs. Yeah, but before we do that, Troy,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you on your point of view when what was his name? Michael Precious. He is working for the House Office of Science and Technology. There
Mhm.
was a summit in Austin, Texas. Endless Frontiers was its name. And there he gave a speech. And in that speech, he said, we can manipulate time and space. He didn't elaborate on it. It was just a
Mhm.
sentence in a
Mhm.
speech.
Yeah.
And then Donald Trump added to it a little bit and talked about weaponry that nobody has a clue that the US is having them.
Mhm.
And what I found irritating was, he didn't say we should aspire to manipulate space and time, or if we did better, we could manipulate space and time. No, he simply said we can manipulate space and time. I
Yeah.
don't know if you heard about this, but what do you make of that?
Actually, it's an interesting thing. When he said it at the time, my first reaction was, yes, the Russians have had this since the 1980s. It's a, uh, all I can say is that the concept when I first was introduced to it was through the writings of a guy called Tom Bearden, Colonel Tom Bearden, who has a bit of a sketchy reputation on the internet for making claims to do with future technologies. He referred to a technology that he said was based on scalar electromagnetics. Now, I'm an electric universe guy who believes that the fundamental force in the universe is electrical and not gravitational. That
Mm,
gravitational is really less than 1%, at most 5% of the equation in terms of physics. But scalar electromagnetics was a very popular, some people call it conspiracy theory type idea. It's floating around in the 1980s. And the book that I got hold of with Tom Bearden was a book called Fer de Lance, in which he explained how scalar electromagnetics, very much based on Nikola Tesla's concepts of electrical generation from the planet and so on, which of course, for people who don't quite understand the electric universe idea, is that the Earth is connected electrically to the sun through a thing called Birkeland currents,
mm,
discovered by Christian Birkeland over 100 years ago, and that the sun itself is connected electrically to a galactic electric dynamo effect, where everything is powered through electrical flow, electrical current. And Thomas Alfvén, Hannes Alfvén, the great Swedish Nobel Prize winning physicist, sort of developed the idea of the galactic current to postulate that basically we live in a world where electricity flows, and Nikola Tesla may have been the first. That's not what Alfvén was talking about. I'm expanding further, but Nikola Tesla was the first to see the possibilities of tapping into that electrical flow.
mm,
Now, if that is the case, that electricity is the primary force in terms of physics, then our definition of time and space is no longer Einstein based. Einstein's, limits of the speed of light and so on, and his equations do not apply with regards to a physics based on the electrical model. They fail on a number of accounts, but one of what that also means is that time and space, as a definition, must be looked at very, very differently. Now, scalar electromagnetic manipulation of electrical time currents claims the idea that as an object passes through the fourth dimension, time, um, uh, if you could, that basically, if you manipulate that, you can put an object in two places, in two different time periods at the same time. And as a result, that will literally tear an object apart. So basically the concept of electroscalar magnetic weaponry and what Trump and people might be talking about, and I'm guessing from this, that this is the area that they're looking at, is that for the whole of mankind's existence, it seems, we've fought wars and weaponry has been based on kinetic. Um, when we're talking about a hard war, as opposed to financial wars and so on, which is another aspect of alchemy and that different types of warfare. But in kinetic warfare, you move an object towards another object at speed. It connects physically, and you get a result. Now that's everything from throwing a stone at somebody and hitting them with that with a slingshot to bashing them with a club, right up to intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is the way we see the world in its military status at the moment. You deliver a kinetic impact, even if it is a kinetic impact that is created by a nuclear device, it is still delivered kinetically through time and space as we know it. Scalar electromagnetics is the idea that as an object is moving through space and it moves into a different time slot, it will rip itself apart because part of it is in the time it started off in. Another part of it enters into a different time. So you literally warp it. You literally rearrange its atoms into two different time sections, and thereby you destroy it. Now, with scalar electromagnetics, the operative word being scalar, the use of the electrics but in the scalar form, these things can be scaled up. So you could quite literally, theoretically, under these ideas, is you can create shields that just simply warp ballistic missiles as they come in, so that they're rendered useless, destroyed in the sky. But there's nothing to say you can't also put a bunch of coordinates into whatever machine you've developed to do this, and evaporate a city by simply half of it enters in half of its molecules enters into a different time zone and it's not a time zone I'm talking about, a different time. You're in a different time zone to me, but
Yeah.
a different time, um, and subsequently disintegrate a city that way. This is what Colonel Tom Bearden was saying was prevalent. The Russians, in particular, were very advanced in this kind of technology as far back as the 1980s. Certainly by the late 1980s. There was a lot of talk to believe that the Russians had developed anti-gravitational systems as early as the 1970s. And again, an anti-gravitational device may be just simply turning time on its on its on its head so that you move in a different direction and so on. It will have, but basically, it all has a basis in electrical energy and the flow of electrical energy through this planet. If you tap that, you tap an energy source that honestly makes nuclear weapons look like firecrackers.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, we will see. The reactions to this was very mixed. A lot of people said something like, yeah, right, they are capable of manipulating time and space, but can't
Mm.
keep a balanced budget.
Yes.
Things like that, which of course is a legitimate point.
Mm.
Um, but that line of argument leaves out what Yeah, Richard Dolan and Dr. Joseph Farrell have coined the breakaway civilization.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if there is a lot more technology than we know, and that this particular breakaway civilization is and has been using it for a long time. It's just not made public. When
Well,
you look at the movie Elysium with Matt Damon and Jodie Foster, the guys who went to the moon and had a colony there and like paradise, every house had its own medical beds that could, yeah, get rid of any disease in a matter of minutes. Yeah, that is the breakaway civilization.
yeah, I also getting back to Trump's statements. Trump has, and I can't quote exactly when, but he said on a number of occasions, going back to 2016, that there are technologies. When he talks about a great time, things are going to happen in the future for America and so on. Um, he has alluded to stuff that is going to pull us away from the current paradigm of metered energy, that kind of thing. And I have long believed that the technologies that Tesla was touching upon, that JP Morgan shut down because he couldn't meter it. The American banker pulled his funding for Tesla and so on. That technology has existed, and one of the reasons that infrastructure is being allowed to degrade the way it is at the moment is because there's no sense in investing in old technology with new technology that will be introduced at some point. Now, if we take the theorizing behind what Tesla was talking about, the idea is that every household will have free access to electricity in any form. So any appliance you have, you just simply flip a switch and it will drag the power out of the air, or there will be a wall in your home that is connected to the earth battery that nobody meters and so on. And so we're living through a period where the current financial system, which is based on the alchemy of debt-based financing, is getting as much out of us as it can, screwing us for every last drop that it can in order to position those that are invested in that system to being able to come back into a new system with new technology, with a new debt-based system to carry on the process, even if we are going to get free energy as such. But it's important to them that they are positioned in such a way as to take advantage of the financing of the new technologies that are coming, supposedly are coming through in the future. I do believe that the revolution of something that I've been a part of, the electric universe concept, the paradigm of thinking about our physics on an electrical point of view, is part of what we are going to see change just everyday life very suddenly. A lot of people forget that if you walk down a street in at the end of the First World War in 1918, the majority of vehicles were still horse-drawn around the world. By 1922, you didn't see a horse in any major city, operating in a commercial way or even in a private way. That's less than 10 years to go from a completely horse-driven culture with all the industries that are centered around horse-driven, making of carriages, saddles, feeding of horses, getting rid of horse dung on the streets, all this kind of stuff changed in 10 years. So that by 1922, people hardly remembered horses. People didn't ride horses, didn't had, they didn't know how to ride. So I can see a very similar thing happening in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I agree, especially with Pluto now in Aquarius, that stands for, yeah, huge leaps forward in terms of technology. The last time we saw that happening was, as I said, during the American and French Revolution, and then we had the steam engine, we had the
Yeah,
train,
yeah,
and yeah, it will come then. It
yeah,
will not stay this way.
that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
definitely.
essentially, we are waiting for a lot of old people to die off with their old paradigm thinking, particularly in the fields of academia, and even in the fields of industrial research. Um, one industry that has to be radically transformed is the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
And um, that's an industry that I watch. People who followed my own work know I identify at an esoteric level the pharmaceutical industry with the concept of Sodom and Gomorrah, the biblical concept. I don't identify Sodom and Gomorrah with sexual immorality as such, even though that was part of the story. To me, it's representative of the pharmaceutical world, of which the illicit drug world, the illegal drugs world, is a very small part of the damage that's been done, to the world through what the pharmaceutical industries. And I see that changing radically as well. But technology change, it's a human foible that we always seem to, at first, apply technological breakthroughs to weaponry. And
Yeah.
it's just, and so weapons that can manipulate time and space, as I say, in what was considered to be, beyond the fringe conspiracy circles, we're talking about these concepts in the late 1980s. Um, and many of them really believed that some of the advances by Nazi Germany, Joseph Farrell has often talked about, the what do you call them, the diglocken, the bell
Die
technology.
Glocke, yeah.
Yeah, they, a lot of that technology, um, was pioneered by what Nazi scientists or scientists working for Nazis were doing. And of course, as we know, Joseph Farrell, in his books about the Nazi International, has always postulated that a breakaway civilization is very much, um, how can I say, it's very much connected to what Martin Bormann built as an extra-national concept, what he called the Fourth Reich, what some people talk about the Underground Reich. I've forgotten his name. The has been going on about it for years and years. Dave. Anyways, a radio podcaster has been talking about this hidden influence in the world
Mhm.
due to the Martin Bormann organization, which was very much centered around companies like. Um, Sorry, you'll have to tell me what was the name of the gigantic German chemical company of the 90s?
Bayer,
Was it, no, Bayer came out of it.
Höchst,
What went before those guys? It was something else. The
IG-Farben.
That's the one. Yeah. What came? IG Farben
Mhm.
is probably the most interesting company to study in terms of the idea that there are these hidden forces in the world at play that we are feeling the effects of, but do not make the news, are not part of the mainstream discussion. They're part of what is considered, conspiracy theory and so on. Um, I mean, Joseph Farrell's work is not new. What's new is that he brings his academic prowess to it, his ability and so on. But people have speculated about this Nazi International, which um, exists at a completely international level. It's not centered in Argentina, or it's not centered wherever, um, a particular place. It's always had an international element to it. And one of the biggest parts of it was what was going on with Operation Paperclip,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the American thing. I've often wondered if Trump, in some way, um, is connected into that aspect of the three main forces of American politics that you have in America, which is those people who got mixed up with the Nazi scientists via Operation Paperclip, the Bushes, the people like that, and so on. I've wondered what Trump's connection is on that level, because I do not believe he's part of the financial cabal. I believe he's in opposition to the financial cabal and to the uh, um, uh, I forget what they. Sorry, uh, the great trust funds
Mhm.
that came out of the great fortunes, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the DuPonts, the people like that that operate in America. I think he's at odds with that, and that's probably one of the most fascinating aspects of even what's going on with the tariff war
I don't
that's
think
taking
so,
place.
but we can talk about that
Sure.
later. I
Yeah.
think he's just trying to change, get rid of that, but transfer it into a different system. Maybe with stablecoin or what have you, but at the end of the day, when you look at that, that
Mhm.
is also something that Catherine Austin Fitz turned out. Yeah, that people are, oh yeah, yay, he banned CBDCs, and
Mm.
she said, yeah, but you are still on the destination of programmable digital money.
Yeah.
And she said, when you look at who is going to control that new system, it's the same families that are running the Fed now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is what I've been. We've often discussed this. It's an opportunity like no time in history before, and I really mean like no time. I'm of the opinion that these families go back to Babylonian times in
Hmm.
terms of their long-term connections. That there is a definite pattern since the time of Babylon of boom bust created by the concept of gold-backed debt-based financing that destroys these civilizations from time to time. You have a Tower of Babel moment, every now and then, every 400 years or so. In since the time of Christ, the financial crisis of 33 AD was one of them. The fall of Rome in the fourth century would be another one of these financial cataclysms. The next biggest one that I can pinpoint in history would be the crisis that led to the Black Death in Europe with the default of the English king to the Florentine bankers in the early 1300s. Uh, and there's other financial problems. The French Revolution is all about a financial problem um, that um, sort of we were talking about the South Seas bubble and the collapse of the French markets because of the Scottish banker John Law. What happened that led to the French Revolution, also to the American Revolution indirectly, because everybody forgets the American Revolution was not about democracy. It was about taxation, representation, if being taxed. It was a tax revolt. If the king had been had of Britain had enough foresight to say, yeah, I'll give you parliamentary representation, the United States may still be a colony of like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, a dominion of the British Empire. But he did not because the because he was in debt to the bankers, to the central bankers, and uh, and now we are facing a a similar turnaround, literally as we sit here, with what's going on in the world, with the opportunity that we had a glimpse of with the way the American Revolution went, as opposed to the French Revolution. Um, Maybe we can pull it off where we just simply, and this is what I have always been advocating, through people like yourself who, are willing to interview me, is that you've got to technology, all this stuff is all very good and such, but you have to get rid of a debt-based financial currency system if you are going to flourish as a human species. And literally, in my opinion, if you're going to stop wars, if all the problems that we have, whether it's racism or whatever it is, wars and so on, it always boils down to the idea that a part of our world always ends up being foreclosed on, no matter how hard they work, the injustice of it. And it goes back to one of the oldest adages of all religions that have it. If you operate with weights and measures that are untrue, false weights and measures, you will end up in a cataclysmic situation, socially, geopolitically, and economically. Um, Sometimes within 70 years, certainly within a 400-year period of time. And uh, that is the system that is so central to the troubles that we have at the moment, which I've always tried to be optimistic about it. Catherine Austin Fitz, I haven't listened to much of her. I'm a big fan of hers. I think she's done a lot of great work and so on, but she has a much more pessimistic view of where we're going because she's worked in government, because she's worked in banking. She's seen the power these people have. And so, really, to be perfectly honest, we are at a point where we need a spiritual revolution as much as we need an actual geopolitical, socioeconomic, political revolution. When I say spiritual, not the intervention of a god figure or anything like that, but simply a reawakening in people's minds towards an understanding, which is the theme of a lot of my recent interviews, that we shift from a world that is based on influence, gaining influence, and being able to influence people to a world of justice where the least of people, because you'll never get rid of poverty and wealth disparity, but where the least of people can be guaranteed an outcome that is just, um, uh, even if they're up against the richest of people on the planet. Um, that has to be the closest to a so-called kingdom of God on earth that we can aspire to. And we have an opportunity at this time to do that. But you can't do it if your fundamental measure of what worth is money. Money is the measure of work done. It is the measure by which we price our labors. And so if that measure is false, we will never get out of this. And they have successfully been able to present themselves for centuries. I'm talking about going back to, you know, beyond 500 BC, but certainly since 500 BC. So for the last 2,500 years, they have always been able to present themselves as a solution to the chaos they create.
Yeah,
It's Hegelian dialectic 101. And yeah, this is the cusp of what we're on at the moment.
yeah. So, yeah, Trump announced the tariffs.
Mhm.
I mean, it wasn't really a surprise. He talked about it during his campaign.
Absolutely.
And then stock markets went into turmoil for friends and enemies
Mm,
alike. Yeah. And the reaction to that has also been very, very mixed. A lot of people say he's an economic moron.
mhm,
Other people say, oh, he's genius.
mhm,
But yeah, I have to say, first of all, I'm not a friend of tariffs, absolutely not.
mhm.
But I think what a lot of people that find it so brilliant do not understand is that they will pay the bill for it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I, what, as you said, it's not as if Trump didn't tell us that this is what he was going to do. He's been saying tariff is a beautiful word for many, many years. In fact, you can go back 40 years and see interviews with Donald Trump. He hasn't changed his position one little bit in terms of what he believes. So, the Trumpian position is that we're living in a world of tariffs anyway. It's just that America is tariffed and such, and he has decided that he is going to change that dynamic as the way he sees that, and so on. Everybody says no, 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 no. We've because you have the world reserve currency, America is not tariffed. They just simply export their inflation, to the rest of the world, and they have to deal with it in that way, through tariffs. So again, it is my opinion the root cause of this is not tariffs. Tariffs are a reaction against a system that guarantees that somebody will always be foreclosed on because you cannot pay that 11th dollar back when you borrow $10 of interest, at 10%. And when you have that unfair system, not only do you get economic disparity, but you will ultimately get wars, because then resources become are fought over by people who have debts to pay. And as long as the central banks have that power to indebt an entire nation to themselves in terms of what's called a balance sheet. Again, how is a balance sheet to be balanced when no one can ever find that 11th dollar that doesn't exist unless it is borrowed in at yet more interest at a later stage? Thus, and it creates a wonderful expansion, which is what fuels imperialism and fuels colonialism, whether you take it from the mercantilism of the British Empire to the corporate mercantilism that America has practiced since the Second World War through its Bretton Woods reserve currency system. Then you have great expansion, but there's always people who are going to lose, and the people that have always lost since the Bretton Woods has been what we call the third world. All right. Through debt, and the IMF was created to go and put those people into even more debt. That's always been the solution. Let them borrow more. And we know the corruption that is fostered by people talk about first world, third world, that kind of stuff. It's not how it worked. It was you had old world, which was the old monarchy system, the old religious systems, including China, and so you had the new world, which was straightforward exploitation of the gold resources, all that sort of stuff from the South Americas, the Americas, Australia, even parts of Africa. And the third world were all the parts of the world that didn't get in on what the old world and the new world were doing, and now have to trade on the systems established by the old world and the new world. And so there's your three that dynamic of a world split three ways, where debt and its effects have been hidden by being literally swept under the third world carpet for all these decades. That's all coming. That's all coming a cropper now, because the economy just can only expand so far enough, with people willing to be exploited so far. And to just jump ahead to try and wind up what I'm saying here, this is why I believe there is a spiritual awakening, that the current world system that we have is based on a lie, a falsity, a false weight and a measure. And it's not just based on a rhetorical lie, it's based on an actual falsity that manifests itself in extreme poverty, and that poverty gap just keeps growing and growing until you get the situation that you have today with wealth disparity.
Mm. Yeah, there is, basically tariffs are import taxes.
Mhm.
But I mean, now we have this 90-day break. Yeah.
Mm,
from a lot of tariffs. We will see how it goes on from there.
yeah.
And one target seems to be China.
Yeah.
And but let's say we keep it simple. China is importing a phone comes from China.
Hmm.
Its worth is $100. So, and now the import tax added to it will be another $100.
Hmm.
It is not China who is paying the $100 plus. It is the American company that is importing
Hmm.
that phone from China
Yeah.
at port of entry.
Hmm.
Then this company will give the extra cost to the retailers.
Sure.
And the retailers will give it to whom?
The customer.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. So yes, on the way he made some revenue,
Hmm.
but actually the customer is holding the bag.
I understand that, but there is the argument that the customer ultimately has the choice. Do they want to buy that phone from that company that's jacked up the price to deal with the tariff? And so therefore, what you introduce into the equation according to that is, will there be an entrepreneur willing enough to say, I'll manufacture that phone in America, to get around the tariff, to give the customer a choice that is different from that phone? So what you have is you have a lag time between the customer being given the choice of somebody being able to produce a cheaper phone within the United States from the time of the phones that they now have, um, that where the price has been jacked up. So the idea, quite simply, is this: is America capable of uh, filling the manufacturing gap that has been given to China over the last 30, 40 years in terms of manufacturing those phones? Will America see a manufacturing boom? This is what Trump wants to see in terms of in terms of what the tariffs actually do, because the reality is that as we've lived in a tariff world, and because of the tariffs going the other way, manufacturing moved to cheaper places where it was cheaper to build something. And so that is the logic behind it, that you don't simply get a static situation where the American populace sits down and goes, oh, right, I can't get phones cheap anymore. Somebody will then have the entrepreneurial oomph to go and do that. And that's why Trump is constantly talking about doing away with regulations in terms of manufacturing of goods, all the regulations that have been built that have forced the American manufacturer, who has to pay the average worker in America maybe $20 an hour, and can see that he gets a better deal for a phone that's made for $1 an hour in China. So again, I mean, one of the most interesting things about the tariff stuff, the mentality behind what we're seeing and what's being exposed here, is in, would you believe it, the board gaming industry, Dungeons and Dragons, this kind of stuff. They're all going to go out of business. Why? Because they make all their stuff in Chinese sweatshops and then they import it into the United States. Now they are going to have to pay an import tax for all the little plastic toys that they make for board gaming. All right. That makes it impossible for them to make a profit based on the fact that they made products using Chinese sweatshops. That's the reality. In China, this stuff is cheap because you can make a Chinese person work for next to nothing compared to somebody in the West. And the
Hmm.
reason that that has happened is because the tariffs were always on the other foot going in. It's not that we lived in a tariff world, tariff-free world, and Trump suddenly introduced it. It's a switch back the other way. It's just the speed at which this stuff is going to be introduced, and the damage it's going to do to the existing markets, that is going to cause the short-term pain. So yeah, inflation exists, and that's why Apple flew in. What was it? Something like four. jumbo plane loads of iPhones to beat the tariffs. Well, those are the phones that the Americans are going to buy over the next year or so while this stuff sorts itself out. That gives Apple time to shift its technology back to America to start producing stuff in America. How quickly that can happen, we don't know. How quickly will the American populace is willing to go back to being a manufacturing society as opposed to a services industry society, like Britain has been. Britain became a nation of shopkeepers because of its empire, where it just simply imported everything in from its empire around the world. This is something the Japanese study and don't want to go down the same road, the way that the British Empire went. Well, this is Trump's attempt at trying to change that. And yeah, it makes no sense from an economic point of view, but from a national point of view, if you are, and this is again an area that I think people do not understand what Trump is really doing. When he talks about, I am not a globalist, when he talks about the globalists, all right, Trump is trying to create an English speaking world sphere, an that thing we call the Anglo-American sphere. All right. He knows that as a world force, it is failing. He knows that it doesn't have the power to do what it's done for the last 150 years, either through the British Empire, through the American nation since the Second World War. He knows that they don't have that capacity. So what he's trying to do is create an Anglo-American sphere, which is quite literally the British Isles, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, and other English-speaking countries that share that same legal background that goes back to the British, Magna Carta, all that kind of stuff, where they can exist using the resources that the North American continent has that's been held in check for so long. I think that is ultimately what he's trying to create is that pariah of a sphere, the Anglo-American sphere that's become a pariah in the world. It will only survive by looking inwards to itself and literally getting its own house, economically speaking, ordered, and letting the rest of the world just get on with what it's going to do. And of course, this brings about the whole concept of who replaces the Anglo-American dominance of the last 150 years. My bet is Russia. A lot of people say China, but my bet is the Slavic influences is the thing that's going to be the dynamicism of what the world will look to. And in that time, Great Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all these English-speaking countries are going to have to readjust themselves to looking economically inwardly as opposed to expanding into other people's economic space and taking advantage of that through their reserve currencies like the British pound was and the American dollar became.
Yeah. So let's say that equation is correct. There's a little problem with that because, okay, Apple, Volkswagen, Mercedes, whoever is going to the United States and producing there. Let's say that is going to happen.
Mm.
When we look at the current numbers in the manufacturing sector, the United States has currently 500,000 jobs that it cannot fill at the current situation. So, and now imagine all these companies. I doubt that they will do that because they will look at the numbers that I just told you. Because who's going to work there? Who? The guys that come out of university with their useless gender studies degrees,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Who's going to work there? Which means it will be chaos. Chaos of the highest order, because you cannot switch from a service society to a manufacturing society within the next 90 days and
Mm.
then everything is hunky-dory. Um, it is too fast, it is too much,
Mm.
and I think it will backfire.
It might do. Again, a more optimistic sort of approach. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier on in the discussion about new technologies. All
Mm,
right. There was much going on um, when I was growing up. The big thing was that, basically the industries that ran the world when I was growing up was automobile manufacturing, the oil industry, that nuts and bolts stuff, and so on. And I lived through the computer revolution when suddenly things, in those times, people were talking about, oh, computers are taking over jobs and all that kind of stuff and so on. Um, that happened. So new technologies that might be on the horizon that we can't see um, are a possible way if you know that these technologies exist and will be released at some point. You're not worried about whether or not the United States can go back to becoming, where Detroit Motor City is pumping out Cadillacs and people are buying those instead of Volkswagens or Toyotas. Um, you don't you don't have to worry about that because there is a change there is a paradigm shift in the way society operates. Uh, what Trump and that have to rely upon is that even though you have this problem, and it is true, it's a generational problem with people who are grown up who do not have the fortitude of the generations before them in terms of what they studied, what they think is relevant to life, and so on like that. Within that, you just need certain entrepreneurial people with leadership capacity, and they can change things in a society through new technologies if they get hold of that. Now, this is all if that happens. If you're trying to work it out on what we have already before us and what is available, um, then it seems that it is a hopeless cause because I would not want to rely on the current gen. I mean, my generation, which is Generation X, we were the generation that really started the ball rolling in terms of lack of responsibility. We and and this is why we have a situation where money gets out of control and so on, because my generation just, particularly in the English speaking West, it's a little bit different. The German world, people that I met, you still had old concepts of, you can't buy something until you've saved enough to do that.
mm,
I grew up with, I'll have it now, thanks, and go into debt and so
mm,
and which is very much the American idea of bankruptcy is almost a badge of honor because you try to do something, you get knocked down, and so the bankruptcy laws allow you to come through again and start again. And of course, we get all the stories about people who've been bankrupt two or three times, then they become multimillionaires. So that's classed as a successful society and such like that. But America's great advantage, including over China, and certainly over Europe, has always been it's blessed with resources. And so if the resources can be freed and you can get rid of the regulation around those resources, and you can take away the control of the people who have that control over those resources in such a way, then the possibility of America entering into a boom period after a very nasty depression period is very high. In terms of in terms of in terms of new technology, in terms of entrepreneurship, if they have the capacity to access those resources. So to ensure that that can happen, not that it will happen, but to ensure that it can happen, you have to shore up the country as a system where it retains at a national level um, the power over its own economic destiny. And as crazy as everything that I see happening in America that is going on, it points to me that this is what they are trying to do. I believe that Donald Trump, who's talked about a strong dollar, and all that sort of stuff. That's been one of his sleight of hands. He wants to crash the dollar. He wants to destroy the dollar because he wants to destroy the Federal Reserve System as an international currency reserve system.
Yeah, he
And
wants to privatize that control.
well, it's already privatized.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
just,
you know, and I'm sorry, I'm with Catherine Austin Fitz here. I think it is just shifting.
yeah.
You know, that the corporations can more and more rule directly.
Hmm. I'll
And
tell
now
you.
with, let's say, because one problem that the Fed still has is
Mhm.
Congress.
Yeah.
They would have loved to come out of that um, for a long, long time.
Hmm.
And when you look at, for
You're talking about
instance,
congressional oversight.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And now when you look at, there have been 18 or 20 investigations
Yeah.
against the companies of Elon Musk,
Hmm.
ethics committee and what have you, and what is happening. A lot of people get fired
Hmm.
that were involved in those investigations.
Hmm.
So, meaning if you eliminate that type of oversight, yeah, then he basically can do whatever he wants.
True, but the point is also if you eliminate that which has been where the oversight is meant to overlook. I mean, the fact of the matter is that congressional oversight has never, ever. Congressional oversight should have started in 1914, 1913.
I
All
know what
right,
you
when they
mean. Yeah,
said this is an illegal thing according to the American Constitution. All
yeah.
right. So, you know, congressional oversight has always been a tool when captured. And this is why we talk about the vested interests
Mm,
that basically you can't become a congressional member unless you're paid for by the people who pay for your campaign and so on like that. It's what made Ron Paul such an interesting character. He never took money and managed to remain a congressman for something like 30 years or more. I can't remember how long he was, but he refused to take that, special interest money that runs Congress at the moment.
mm,
I mean, Congress is captured by Israeli concerns. This is one of the reasons why you can't get a decent judgment out of Congress when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East, because they're bought and paid for in terms of the IPAC influences in the United States. Uh, so congressional oversight has always, it's my opinion, it's always been an illusion since 1913, when America was put under a private institution in terms of the coinage of its money.
mm.
All right, which has always been a problem. There has never been an audit of the Federal Reserve in the entire time. So when you get people like Elizabeth Warren and you get people jumping up and down about, he's taking away our ability to have oversight and so on. I'm sorry, you guys had decades and decades of oversight capacity that you never used at that time. So that comes down to what exactly is Trump doing? He's a demolition man more than he is an enrichment man for himself, because there is no doubt that Donald Trump would have had a fantastic life if he had never got involved in all this. He's This is not making him richer in any way. Elon Musk himself as well is facing such opposition in terms of the people who are against Trump, and because he has come in on the part of Trump, that it makes no sense from a financial point of view to have ever gotten involved with Trump in the first place. The way they're trying to crash his stock, the way that they're trying to do all of this sort of stuff. So, what is the advantage that is being pursued on the part of Trump and Elon Musk and what they're doing in terms of changing the system? Is it for personal gain? Is it for simply a changing of the old guard for the same old gang, but a different leadership? There's, in other words, it's an internal scrap within the old gang for who's going to control the future. Is it that, or is it something else? And I always point to something that Trump has said over and over again. Trump has always said, if a diamond thief steals diamonds and is caught, does he get to keep the diamonds? All right. So that has been a constant theme that Trump has said. That's almost word for word. He keeps talking about, does a diamond thief, when he's caught stealing diamonds, get to keep the diamonds? All right. What he's really saying is that if you look at the national debt of the United States as the private asset of the central banking system, that not only is the Federal Reserve, but is actually centered in the City of London. That entire central banking system is really about that particular entity that exists in the City of London. They call it the square mile, the city here in London. The national debt of countries is actually their asset. Right? They claim it as their asset. It's on their books. It's what they're owed. They can foreclose on that asset. They feel legally entitled to that debt that they created through interest-based finance. Now, if you then go to the oldest form of justice in terms of monetary assets, in terms of monetary systems, all right, an onerous debt is not something that is legal to foreclose on. In other words, a shark, a loan shark, all right, doesn't get to still foreclose on the people he lent money at extortionate rates to after he's been convicted of being a loan shark. All right. The crime doesn't stand even after you are convicted. You don't get to keep the proceeds of your crime at a future time if you are convicted. We do actually live in a world where where that happens anyway. There's enough stories of people who go to go to trial and come out of jail even richer than they were because they were living off the interest that they had earned off the criminal proceedings that they had socked away from themselves. Plenty of examples of that. This is what the central banks from the time of Babylon have always done. They keep these criminal proceedings as an asset against the country and say, you owe, you owe. But if in fact you can show an example, if you can show a legal argument that national debt is an onerous debt, then what you are talking about is Trump's idea of the diamond thief. Does he get to keep the diamonds that he stole? So if the ancient idea of interest bearing money is an abomination and a sin and all this sort of stuff and essentially illegal by the oldest standards of how city systems, how national systems work, then the argument is that all that debt that the Federal Reserve has, that they use as a power over people, the borrower always being a slave to the lender, if that becomes the very proof that they are criminal because they have taken that through onerous debt applied on the country, then essentially by a legal factor, they lose all that as their power leverage over countries and the debt goes away. We have a jubilee. And essentially, I've always argued that the ultimate result of what we're seeing in the world today will be an international jubilee against debt. And that includes the third world, everybody, includes the United States. You've got to get rid of that. They are the diamonds that must be returned that the central bank stole with regards its
This was the public hour. For full access of the entire interview, please join our Patreon community. Thank you.